April 1966. The 1st Australian Task Force deploys to Nui Dat. Numbering over 4,000 men, this is the largest Australian force deployed overseas since the Second World War. Australian forces, specialists in counterinsurgency and jungle warfare, are now operating independently from their American allies. As a formation-level command under US 2nd Field Force, Vietnam, the 1st Australian Task Force operates within its own tactical area of responsibility, the Phuoc Tuy Province. It's 30 degrees Celsius in the jungle, extremely high humidity with frequent monsoonal rains. Under the command of Brigadier David Jackson, 5th Battalion and 6th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, secure Nui Dat and commence their tactical war against a communist enemy force. 29th of July 1966. Australian Signals Intelligence now begins to intercept radio transmissions coming from the jungle deep inside enemy Viet Cong territory and moving closer to Nui Dat. Only a significant enemy headquarters possesses such a capability, like a regiment or higher. And over the next 2 weeks, Australian signallers track the radio's movement as it comes closer, until it stops 5 kilometres to the east, just outside of Australian artillery range. 17th August, 02:43 in the morning. The enemy attack is a 22-minute artillery, mortar and rocket barrage, which injures 24 Australians. 7 minutes after the first enemy round impacts, the Australian 1st Field Regiment returns counter-battery fire, targeting the quickly withdrawing enemy over the next hour. As dawn rises, Commanding Officer 6 RAR, Lieutenant Colonel Colin Townsend, orders Bravo Company to patrol to the east to establish the direction of enemy withdrawal. The enemy fire originated from the direction of the abandoned village of Long Tan. Under the command of Major Noel Ford, Bravo Company now moves swiftly east and quickly locates the mortar firing points. Numbering only 80 men and under strength, Bravo Company is now ordered to remain in the jungle, receive ration resupply and continue the patrol the next day. 9 Platoon, Charlie Company, deploys in armoured personnel carriers, but finds nothing. However, 1 ATF commander, Brigadier Jackson, aware of the enemy radio nearby, orders 5 RAR to return to Nui Dat. The morning's artillery barrage indicates a high probability for future kinetic events. 18th of August 1966, 1100 hours. Under the command of Major Harry Smith, Delta Company, 6 RAR, now departs Nui Dat and hurries to relieve Bravo Company, who has spent the night in the jungle. 6 RAR receives no warning of the enemy radio signals, and Delta Company departs without taking any extra ammunition. The jungle is hot and humid. 108 men move at pace, single file, traversing swamps and muddy fields. An Australian rock star arrives at Nui Dat in 2 Iroquois helicopters and begins a rock concert for the diggers. As they patrol through the jungle, Delta Company can hear the music echoing through the trees. 2 hours into the patrol, Delta Company marries up with Bravo and immediately moves into all-round defence. 2.5 kilometres from Nui Dat, on the edge of a rubber plantation, Australian forces find military equipment and bloodstains. 1500 hours. Bravo Company heads back to Nui Dat. Delta Company continues, moving further to the northeast. Patrolling 2 up, 1 back, 10 metres between each man, Delta Company advances forward. 1540 hours. 11 Platoon, in the middle of an obstacle crossing, watches as 7 Vietnamese soldiers wearing khaki uniforms walk obliviously past and immediately scatter when engaged by Australian rifle fire. 11 Platoon immediately reorientates in pursuit. Now patrolling in extended line, 11 Platoon quickly discovers an AK-47 abandoned on the jungle floor. Only a main force unit uses this type of weapon system and wears khaki uniforms, like the 275th Regiment. However, the significance of this discovery is not immediately identified. 11 Platoon advances forwards, moving carefully through neat rows of trees, a rubber plantation. Now separated 300 metres from 10 Platoon, the linking Australian sections lose sight of each other through the dense jungle vegetation. 16:08 hours. 11 Platoon's left flank is engaged by machine gun fire, killing 5 men. Then tracer fire, then rocket-propelled grenades from 3 sides. As if on cue, heavy rains begin, a monsoonal downpour which reduces visibility to just 50 metres and turns the ground to red mud. Australian forces now commence an encounter battle against a regimental-sized Viet Cong enemy force. And unknown to Australian forces, Delta Company 6 RAR is outnumbered 20-1. 16:30 hours, 20 minutes into contact, and 1/3 of 11 Platoon is dead or wounded, including the platoon commander, 2nd Lieutenant Gordon Sharp. He was 21 years old. Sergeant Buick takes command, but the radio is shot. 11 Platoon is now almost surrounded, taking intense enemy fire and without comms. 10 Platoon, under the command of 2nd Lieutenant Jeff Kendall, quickly drops packs and advances to contact, breaking up a Viet Cong flanking attack. However, heavy machine gun fire immediately engages 10 Platoon from 3 sides, damaging a 2nd Australian radio and forcing 10 Platoon to the ground. Now also without comms, 10 Platoon and 11 Platoon fight separate tactical battles with no mutual support and no way of directing artillery fire. The monsoonal rains turn the battlefield to mud. Visibility is greatly reduced as men run and fight between the trees. Close quarters combat commences. Private Bill Akel kills 2 Viet Cong on his way from Delta Company headquarters with a replacement radio for 10 Platoon. Under intense enemy fire, 11 Platoon's broken radio is finally repaired, allowing Sergeant Buick to call in artillery fire, danger close, nearly on his own position. 11 Platoon is on the verge of destruction. Only 10 men now remain combat effective. New Zealand forward observer, Captain Maurice Stanley, provides expert support and walks regimental artillery fire missions to within 50 metres of 11 Platoon's extended line, destroying an entire enemy Viet Cong assault force. Over the next 3 hours, the 18 Australian and New Zealand and 6 American field artillery guns play a decisive role, firing more than 3,500 rounds in what will become recognised as one of the most effective demonstrations of indirect fire support out of the entire Vietnam War. 18th of August 1966, 1700 hours. In the rain and in the mud, Delta Company is running low on ammunition and fighting for existence. Delta Company headquarters is now receiving Australian wounded, and the hastily sited casualty collection point effectively prevents further manoeuvre. Australian forces have lost the initiative. Major Smith requests reinforcements. 10 armoured personnel carriers prepare to deploy, but are ordered to delay for an hour in case this is the enemy's feint, the deception plan prior to a larger main assault against Nui Dat. Under the command of 2nd Lieutenant David Sabin, 2 sections from 12 Platoon now fight to connect with 11, but go to ground under heavy fire. Delta Company is now splintered, with all 3 platoons in contact with the enemy. 10 Platoon, using fire and movement, finally manages to break contact and withdraw to Delta Company headquarters. They bring more wounded with them. Brigadier Jackson now requests urgent support from No. 9 Squadron, the Royal Australian Air Force, for ammunition resupply by Iroquois helicopter. Australian Group Captain Peter Rohr initially denies the request, but consents when US forces offer instead. 2 Australian resupply helicopters and 3 US supersonic fighter jets immediately deploy towards Delta Company. With close air support inbound, Sergeant Buick now orders smoke grenades to be thrown. However, the intense rain prevents any smoke from rising above the jungle canopy. With no way of identifying the Australian position, the US pilots are forced to drop their loads of napalm on suspected enemy withdrawal routes in the rear. Back on the ground, Bravo Company, having been ordered to hold positions for over an hour, now hurriedly returns to support Delta Company. 18th of August 1966, 17:45 hours. Alpha Company 6 RAR now finally boards the 10 APCs. Under the command of Lieutenant Adrian Roberts, 3 Troop 1 APC Squadron now departs Nui Dat and rushes to relieve Delta Company. 2 vehicles are ordered to turn back to pick up CO 6 RAR. Lieutenant Roberts does not wait for them to return, and now down to just 8 vehicles, 3 Troop advances east. In the air, Australian Flight Lieutenants Cliff Dole and Frank Riley, flying skillfully just above the jungle canopy, pushing their choppers to the absolute limit in the pouring rain, now arrive above Delta Company and drop the urgently required ammunition right in the CSM's lap. On the ground, 12 Platoon struggles to load rifle magazines, the ammunition still in bandoliers. They work fast, they're down to their last 100 rounds. Having maintained its position for 2 hours, the surviving members of 11 Platoon finally manage to withdraw under fire. They leave behind 15 men. Linking up with 12 Platoon, Delta Company now moves into all-round defence. A lull in the battle. Smith ties in defensive positions to establish mutual support, whilst ammunition is cross-levelled. With luck, Delta Company now finds itself on the reverse slope of a small hill, and the Vietnamese long-range, heavy-caliber weapons are starting to miss. Having just swum his 8 APCs across a fast-flowing river for a second time, Lieutenant Roberts receives orders to halt and wait for his commanding officer. Monitoring Delta Company's situation on the radio, for a second time, he prioritises tempo and continues forward, leaving behind a single vehicle to secure the river crossing point. Lieutenant Roberts now deploys his force, 2 up, 1 back, on either side of the road, with headquarters in the centre, advancing forward with a 300-metre frontage. A third order to halt. Rifle and machine gun fire can now be heard hammering through the trees. Lieutenant Roberts, for a third and final time, presses forwards and takes the fight to the enemy. Visibility is severely limited. Young rubber trees, jungle vegetation, and the monsoonal downpour masks 3 troops' advance, as they run directly into an enemy Viet Cong battalion preparing to encircle Delta Company. 3 Troop engages with 50 cals and small arms fire, killing 40 and forcing the enemy to withdraw. Corporal John Carter, his 50 cal jammed, is forced to engage the enemy with just his Owen gun, killing 5 Viet Cong from just 15 metres. 18th of August 1966, 18:35 hours. 2 Viet Cong infantry companies, blasting bugle horns, now charge forwards and attack Delta Company in a frontal assault. Freshly bombed up with ammunition, Delta Company increases rates of fire and pushes the enemy back. The Australian, New Zealand and US artillery batteries, now firing nearly continuously, superbly targets the enemy's rear echelon, effectively destroying the enemy reserve force. Delta Company now engages with rifle and machine gun fire from a range of only 50 metres, and the enemy charge is halted. A second Viet Cong Company assault meets the same result. Plunging enemy machine gun fire now starts to rain down, but scattered and inaccurate, the dense jungle canopy hiding Delta Company's defensive position. Despite the improved tactical situation, an additional 4 Australian soldiers are killed in action, and the role of the Australian infantry is increasingly becoming one of protecting their New Zealand artillery forward observers, who are now coordinating regimental fire missions only 25 metres out from the perimeter. Delta Company, unable to manoeuvre, heavily outnumbered, is on the verge of being overrun. 18th of August 1966, 1900 hours. In the last light of a Vietnamese sunset, 3 Troop, now consisting of 9 APCs and Lieutenant Colonel Townsend, advances east in assault formation. Cheers erupt from Delta Company, the M113 vehicle headlights visible through the trees, as 3 Troop now engages an enemy force massing for one final attack on the Australian defensive position. Rapid machine gun fire from the highly mobile Australian armour now turns the tide of the battle, breaking the enemy's will to fight, forcing the Viet Cong to break contact and withdraw. As the 32 men of Bravo Company marry up with Delta, the APCs now in hollow square formation, the jungle finally falls silent on what will become known as Australia's single deadliest engagement in the Vietnam War. During the Battle of Long Tan, Australian forces are estimated to have fought over 1,000 enemy Viet Cong, killing 245 and wounding over 100 for the cost of 18 Australian lives and 24 wounded. And whilst both sides will claim victory, the Battle of Long Tan successfully establishes Australia's military dominance over the Phuoc Tuy Province, and Australia's defensive base at Nui Dat will never again be seriously threatened. General Westmoreland, the commander of US forces in Vietnam, is so impressed by the discipline, bravery and effectiveness of Australian forces that he declares Long Tan as one of the most spectacular victories in Vietnam to date. In 1968, Delta Company 6 RAR is awarded a US Presidential Unit Citation by US President Lyndon B. Johnson, and in 2010 an Australian Unit Citation for Gallantry from the Governor-General. For their actions, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment and the Royal Australian Regiment are awarded the Long Tan Battle Honour, one of 5 awarded over the course of the Vietnam War. Today, the Long Tan Battle Honour is still emblazoned on the regimental colours of all 7 battalions of the Royal Australian Regiment.